Welcome, wherever you are, however your day has gone. This is a place where you can let your mind settle. You're invited to drift gently into another time, another rhythm, a quieter world. Tonight, we'll be slipping through the gates of a medieval monastery. The cloisters are hushed, the stones cool underfoot, and the incense hangs thick in the morning air, far from bustling cities and noisy marketplaces. This is a world governed by bells, by prayer, and by silence. And yet, life here is not as peaceful as it might seem. This video, Why You Wouldn't Last a Day in a Medieval Monastery, is not meant to scare you, but to gently peel back the layers of an existence both strange and serene. You'll experience the daily routines, the inner rules, the secret discomforts, and the steady, unyielding discipline that shaped the lives of monks for centuries. As always, we'll travel through 4 distinct paths tonight. We'll begin by immersing ourselves in the daily rhythm of monastic life, step by step, breath by breath. Then we'll shift to a deeper portrait, exploring a real-life monk whose story quietly shaped his world. From there, we'll descend into the mysteries that lie beneath, the secret codes, the hidden rooms, the whispered debates about what was and wasn't allowed behind cloistered walls. And finally, we'll look beyond the habits and vows into the contrasting lives of the wealthy elite and the barefoot peasants who watch the monks from beyond the abbey walls. So, find your breath, let your muscles soften, and imagine yourself walking slowly along an old stone path toward the great wooden doors of a monastery as the first light of morning touches the chapel roof. Let us begin. Imagine yourself rising in the cold hush of pre-dawn. There are no clocks, only the ringing of the bell, echoing through the cloister like a distant voice. It's matins, the first prayer of the day. The air is heavy with dew. Your feet touch the cold, flagstone floor. Silence surrounds you. You pull your robe, coarse wool, warm but scratchy, closer around you. In this world, every movement is intentional. Every breath a reminder of humility. There is no need for words, only presence. You join the others, heads bowed, robes swaying faintly, walking in solemn procession toward the chapel. The liturgy begins in chant. Low, measured, ancient syllables fill the dim space. The stone walls carry the sound like a memory, soft and echoing. These prayers, sung in Latin, are older than you, older than your parents, older than the very walls around you. You may not understand every word, but they are not for understanding. They are for devotion. Once prayers conclude, there's a short moment to return to your cell, a tiny room, just large enough for a wooden bed, a small writing desk, and a single candle. There are no decorations. Monks are discouraged from cultivating attachment. This is not a place of comfort. It is a place of surrender. Shortly after, it is time for lauds, the second prayer of the day, just as the sky begins to turn gray. And then, without any discussion, the brothers divide for their duties. You might be assigned to the kitchen, preparing a frugal breakfast of barley bread and weak ale, perhaps some beans if it is a feast day. Or you may be sent to the gardens to gather herbs for the infirmary. Some are scribes, hunched over vellum, copying ancient texts with aching fingers and meticulous care. The hours pass slowly, marked by bells, terce, sext, none. Each one brings more prayer, more work, more silence. There is no conversation, only gesture. If you must speak, you whisper with care. Many monasteries enforced strict silence in certain hours, meant to protect the sacred stillness of the mind. The food is simple: lentils, onions, dark bread. Meat is a rarity, eaten only by the sick, and even then, sparingly. On some days, fasting continues through the evening. Hunger is not a hardship here. It is discipline, a reminder of spiritual dependence. Mid-afternoon brings manual labor, perhaps tending to animals, grinding grain, or assisting the elderly brothers. Every monastery had its own duties, depending on location and resources, but the rhythm remained consistent. Work, prayer, silence, humility. The evening light dims the chapel as vespers are sung, and candles flicker softly against the stone. The night draws in, quiet and deep. After Compline, the final prayer of the day, the monks retire to their cells. There is no entertainment, no reading for pleasure, no idle chatter, only reflection, prayer, and rest. It is in this space that sleep finally comes, not with softness or luxury, but with stillness. The straw-stuffed mattress offers little comfort. The air remains cold. But the soul, perhaps, is meant to be warmed by something else. And so, the day ends. And tomorrow, it will begin again. Exactly the same. The same prayers. The same hunger. The same sacred quiet. This was the rhythm of their lives. Quiet, steady, demanding. Now, if you're still awake, let us gently move onward to the life of one man who lived this rhythm more intensely than most. Let us meet Bernard of Clairvaux. Imagine now the early 12th century. The world beyond the cloister is stirring with conflict and movement. The church is rising ever higher in worldly affairs. Kings negotiate with abbots, and great councils are held in stone chambers, echoing with voices of power, but within the stillness of monastic walls. One man begins to shape the future of religious life, not through conquest or command, but through relentless faith and quiet authority. This is the world of Bernard of Clairvaux. Bernard was born in the year 1090 in the region of Burgundy, in what is now eastern France. His family was noble, wealthy, and respected, but Bernard was not drawn to the trappings of courtly life. Even from a young age, he was described as introspective, contemplative. Some said luminous in his devotion. Yet even that was not so uncommon in those times. What set Bernard apart was not simply his piety, but the strength of his conviction, a conviction that would come to move not just monks and abbots, but kings and popes. When he was around 20, Bernard entered the Abbey of Citeaux. This was not a comfortable decision. Citeaux, unlike many older monasteries, was part of a growing reform movement. The Cistercians, of which it was the founding house, sought a stricter adherence to the rule of Saint Benedict, less ornamentation, more silence, more labor, more discipline. It was a colder, starker life than most young men of his status would have chosen. But Bernard was not alone. In an act that surprised and unsettled many, Bernard convinced over 24 men, including his own brothers, his uncle, and several friends, to join the monastery with him. In one sweeping gesture, a generation of young nobles laid down their swords, gave up their inheritance, and stepped into a life of cloistered simplicity. Their families were shocked. Some were angry, but Bernard had a way of stirring something deep in the hearts of others, of making the worldly life seem strangely empty by comparison. He was not loud. He was not forceful, but he was unwavering. In time, the Cistercian order began to grow, and when Bernard was still a young man, only 25, he was asked to lead a new foundation. He would become abbot of a new monastery, built in a remote and untamed valley. It was called Clairvaux, meaning the clear valley. But at the time, it was anything but clear. The land was dense with brush, cold, and unwelcoming. The work of founding the monastery was difficult and slow, but Bernard led with quiet determination. Under his guidance, Clairvaux flourished. More than a monastery, it became a model, a place of discipline, learning, and deep spiritual rigor. Bernard preached humility and simplicity. He fasted frequently, some say to the point of self-harm, and his health was often frail, and yet he remained active, writing letters, delivering sermons, mediating disputes between religious leaders. His words were copied and carried across Europe. Bernard's influence grew well beyond the cloister. He became an advisor to popes, a voice in great theological disputes, a participant in the great councils of the church. Yet he never sought power for its own sake. In fact, he often resisted it. He once declined a bishopric, and when offered higher office, he politely, firmly said no. Still, his presence was felt in every corner of Christendom. He denounced corruption in the church with quiet severity. He challenged heretical teachings. Famously, he debated the philosopher Peter Abelard, an encounter that became one of the defining intellectual clashes of the century. Bernard, ever the mystic, distrusted excessive rationalism. Abelard, the logician, championed reason. Their dispute was not dramatic in tone, but profound in consequence. Bernard's influence ultimately prevailed. Abelard was condemned, though later reconciled. Bernard himself remained steadfast. And then there was the Second Crusade. In the year 1145, Pope Eugenius III, once a Cistercian monk under Bernard's own guidance, called for a new crusade to reclaim lost territories in the Holy Land. The First Crusade had carved out fragile kingdoms, but they were falling, and a new call to arms was sounded. The Pope turned to Bernard. It is a moment that sits uneasily in the legacy of Bernard of Clairvaux. With eloquence and passion, Bernard preached the crusade across Europe. His words moved thousands. Knights took up the cross. Cities sent provisions, but the campaign, in time, would fail, marked by poor leadership, internal divisions, and brutal consequences for those caught in its path. Bernard was devastated. In his later writings, he expressed sorrow for the outcome, but he did not renounce his belief in the cause. To him, the failure lay not in the divine call, but in the failings of men to uphold its virtues. It was a quiet wound, one he carried for the rest of his life. Despite this, his influence continued to grow. Monasteries multiplied under the Cistercian banner. At the height of the order's expansion, hundreds of abbeys bore Bernard's influence, either directly or through his many protégés. His writings, especially on divine love, humility, and the Virgin Mary, were copied with reverence. He was, for many, the voice of Christian devotion in its purest form. Bernard died in 1153 at Clairvaux, the monastery he had built with his own hands. He was canonized less than 20 years later. In time, he would be named a doctor of the Church, one of the highest honors in Catholic tradition. And yet, even in death, his legacy feels quiet, not grand, not triumphant, but persistent, like the sound of distant bells in a morning fog. His presence continues to echo across the centuries, a man of silence who moved the world, now let us leave his footsteps behind and turn toward the shadows that linger beyond the cloister's edge. Not all in monastic life was known or understood, even by those within. There were mysteries in the manuscripts, secrets in the architecture, unspoken tensions between body and spirit. Let us now descend gently into the hidden corners of the monastic world. Imagine yourself once more within the stone walls of a medieval monastery, but now not as a laborer nor a novice adjusting to the rhythm of daily prayers. Imagine instead that you are walking the silent corridors alone in the twilight hours when most have already retired to their cells. The halls are quiet, more than quiet. They seem to hold their breath. Only the faintest sounds carry. A distant drip of water from a cloister fountain, the whisper of wind passing through high, narrow windows, and something else. A sense, almost, that the very stones are keeping secrets, and in many ways, they are. The hidden language of monastic architecture, monastic buildings, were not designed for comfort or aesthetic flourish. They were built to guide the soul. The very structure of the monastery was a spiritual diagram, an architectural embodiment of inner discipline and sacred order. The church, often at the heart of the compound, was oriented east to west. This was not arbitrary. The east, where the sun rises, symbolized resurrection and divine light. Monks would pray facing the dawn, their voices rising in chant as the light slowly filled the nave. Surrounding the church were the cloisters, enclosed walkways that formed a square around an open courtyard. The cloister was a world within a world. Walking the cloister, a monk moved through repetition and reflection, over and over, step by step, in a quiet echo of their own spiritual journey. These paths were not just passageways, they were meditations in stone. Then there were the chapter houses, circular or polygonal rooms, where monks gathered each morning to read a passage from the rule and confess their faults, however small. The domed ceilings and acoustic design made even a whisper carry. One voice filled the room with ease, and so did silence. The dormitories were simple, narrow, austere, rows of beds or mats, each the same, each stripped of comfort or excess. The refectory, the dining hall, was often aligned so that sunlight would move gradually across the stone floor during the midday meal. The rhythm of the sun became the rhythm of the soul, and buried beneath it all, sometimes literally, were the crypts, not merely tombs, but spaces of sacred memory. Many monastic crypts contained relics, bones, cloth, fragments, believed to be touched by saints. They were not displayed ostentatiously. They were tucked away in silence, behind iron gates, under altars. Their power was not visual, but spiritual. The scribes and their quiet magic. Yet perhaps the greatest secrets of the monastery were not in its stones, but in its pages. The scriptorium was the monastery's mind, where books were copied, preserved, sometimes even created. The scriptorium was often cold, dimly lit, and meticulously quiet. Each monk worked at a narrow desk, quill in hand, copying line after line of ancient texts. They wrote not to be known, not to be praised, but to preserve what was sacred. Some copied scripture, others copied the writings of church fathers. A few, more rarely, reproduced classical texts, Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, though these were often reinterpreted through a theological lens. Each letter was a prayer, each flourish a devotion. The inks were handmade, soot for black, woad or copper salts for blue and green. The pages were often vellum, prepared animal skin, smoothed and stretched. To us, this seems archaic, but to them, it was the highest form of reverence. The very act of writing was a way of worshipping the word. Some manuscripts included illuminations, gold leaf, rich pigments, ornate letters blooming at the start of paragraphs. These were not just decoration. They were theology in color. Every dragon, every vine, every gleaming halo carried meaning. Occasionally, in the margins, monks left small notes, not grand insights, just brief, human touches. A scribe might write, "The sun is shining, and I long to be outside," or, "This is a hard hand to follow." Sometimes, they copied errors from earlier texts, not knowing they were mistakes, and in doing so, preserved the very shape of time. And every once in a while, something more mysterious appears, the strange and the unexplained. There are manuscripts that contain strange symbols, untranslated alphabets, diagrams that seem almost scientific or alchemical. The most famous example, the Voynich manuscript, remains unreadable to this day. While not certainly monastic in origin, it bears many similarities to the illuminated texts created in cloisters. Some believe such books were exercises in code or early experiments in artificial language. Others think they were devotional puzzles, meant only to be understood by a few. Still others suggest they were attempts to contain secret knowledge about herbs, the stars, or the body, in a time when such studies were often frowned upon. And then there is the music. Monasteries were one of the few places in medieval Europe where written music survived. Gregorian chant, simple and monophonic, was transcribed in early numies, marks that floated above the text. These chants were sung in slow, measured tones. They rose not for performance, but for prayer. There is something otherworldly in the sound. Even now, recordings of plain chant seem to stop time. They do not demand attention. They invite surrender, as though the music is not being performed, but revealed. The monastic mind, a tension between flesh and spirit. Beneath all this, the stone and ink, the chant and silence, was the central tension of monastic life, the desire to transcend the body, even as one lived within it. Monks believed the physical world was a veil, a shadow. The true world, the eternal one, was beyond. And yet, they lived in bodies that ached, hungered, weakened. They tilled the soil. They bled when they were cut. They grieved their brothers when death came quietly in the night. This tension shaped their spirituality. They fasted to discipline desire. They slept little to deny indulgence. They wore coarse clothing to humble the flesh. Yet through this denial, they sought not to destroy the body, but to purify it, to make it a vessel for grace. And so, they lived between worlds, half in silence, half in song, half in this life, half reaching toward another. Their secrets were not hidden to deceive. They were simply layered, like the walls of the monastery itself, built one stone at a time over many years, and meant to last far longer than the lives of the men who built them. And now, as we step gently away from the hidden corners of the cloister, we turn our eyes upward, not to the monks in their cells or fields, but to those who visited rarely or ruled from afar. Let us now explore the world of abbots, bishops, nobles, those whose lives of influence contrasted sharply with the quiet poverty of the monk. while monks bent over scripture in the flickering silence of the scriptorium, while novices quietly weeded kitchen gardens or knelt in night vigils beneath cold stone arches, there were others whose lives followed a very different rhythm. Imagine yourself now at the gates of a grand monastery, watching as a noble entourage approaches, horses shod in iron, cloaks lined with fur, the bishop's ring glinting faintly in the morning light. The sound of hooves on gravel breaks the cloister's stillness. These visitors do not live by the bell. They do not fast in silence or sleep in dormitories with straw-stuffed pallets. Yet they, too, are part of monastic life, distant but intertwined. This is the world of abbots and bishops, of kings who donate lands, of noble sons who enter monasteries not out of calling but expectation, and of monasteries themselves. As holders of power, let us step into this quiet undercurrent of wealth, status, and sacred politics. Abbots, spiritual shepherds, and earthly managers. At first glance, an abbot seemed simply a monk among monks. He wore the same habit, lived in the same cloister, prayed the same prayers. But the role of the abbot was one of immense responsibility. He was not only the spiritual leader of his community, he was also the manager of lands, revenues, supplies, and legal obligations. Many monasteries held vast tracts of land, granted by kings or noble families seeking divine favor or to atone for sins. These lands were not only symbolic gifts, they were working estates, with tenants, serfs, livestock, and crops. The monastery, for all its vows of poverty, might be one of the wealthiest institutions in the region. The abbot oversaw all of this. Some abbots rarely left the cloister. Others traveled often, attending councils, settling disputes, or visiting other monastic houses. They might arbitrate quarrels between knights, or negotiate with secular lords about land rights, taxes, or borders. They kept records, meticulously maintained charters and cartularies that detailed every acre, every grant, every toll. A skilled abbot had to be as capable with parchment and seal as he was with scripture. Some were humble, others were not. There are accounts of abbots traveling with attendants, dining with silverware, and wearing embroidered gloves. A far cry from the Cistercian ideal of simplicity, but such examples, while real, were not necessarily the norm. The line between spiritual purity and administrative necessity was never clearly drawn. Some abbots tried to live as simply as their brothers. Others drifted, quietly, into the comforts that wealth could bring. And all the while, the world beyond the cloister watched. Bishops and power. Between crozier and crown bishops, too, lived in tension between two realms. They were the spiritual overseers of dioceses, vast territories containing towns, villages, and monasteries. But they were also feudal lords. In many cases, bishops controlled armies, collected rents, and sat in councils of war. Some bishops were former monks, rising from cloister to cathedral. Others were sons of nobility, placed in office by family connections or royal favor. A bishop might own castles, might command soldiers, might be tasked with defending a region from bandits or invading forces. Their lives were far removed from the quiet of the cloister, and yet bishops were expected to embody spiritual leadership. They anointed kings. They consecrated altars. They were meant to be shepherds of the faithful. But how does one remain a shepherd when wearing the robes of a prince? It was not easy. There are letters, preserved in cathedral archives, where monks write with veiled criticism about bishops who rarely visited their dioceses, who spent more time hunting than preaching, or who enriched their relatives with church land. And there were bishops who pushed back, who saw the cloistered life as too detached, too passive, too idealized. The relationship was rarely simple. Sometimes they were allies. A bishop might protect a monastery from encroaching nobles or defend its rights in court. Other times, they were rivals, arguing over tithes, land ownership, or legal jurisdiction. And beneath all this, the people watched. To the average peasant or townsperson, both bishop and monk were holy men. But one lived in silence and sandals. The other, perhaps, arrived in a gilded carriage. It must have seemed curious. Noble sons and quiet intrusions, noble families, eager to secure spiritual favor, or simply to manage inheritance, often placed younger sons into monasteries. This was sometimes done with sincerity, other times with calculation. Imagine being a young man of 12, the third son of a powerful lord. You are told that you will become a monk. You will not inherit land. You will not ride to battle. You will kneel before an abbot, take vows of obedience, and begin a life of silence and prayer. Some embraced the path. Others resisted it inwardly, struggling for years. And some, especially those from noble birth, brought with them certain expectations. They might expect a better cell, a gentler hand from their superiors. Some even rose swiftly to positions of leadership, bypassing the slow, steady path followed by common-born brothers. This created tensions within the cloister. The rule of Saint Benedict made no distinction between rich and poor, but human hearts are not so easily governed. Resentment simmered quietly at times. Favoritism, pride, the echoes of the outside world reverberating inside stone walls. And yet, monasteries persisted. Some noble monks became devoted ascetics. Some common-born brothers became abbots. And over the centuries, the monastic ideal endured, not in spite of its contradictions, but through them. Monasteries as landholders and quiet powers. At their height, monasteries were among the largest landowners in Europe. They collected rents, operated mills, lent seed and livestock. Their economic power was quiet, but vast, and with this power came influence. Monasteries could affect local markets, provide shelter to pilgrims, or host visiting kings. In times of war, they might serve as sanctuaries. In times of famine, they might feed the hungry, within limits. Their generosity, while real, was tempered by the need to survive. Some even minted coins, and so, within these supposedly silent walls, political alliances were formed. Petitions were written. Decrees were signed. History moved, slowly, quietly, on parchment and prayer. Monasteries were never entirely separate from the world. They were part of it, shaped by it. And yet, in their best moments, they offered something rare, a place where time moved slower, where prayer was constant, and where, for a few, the eternal seemed just slightly closer. And so we leave the quiet cloisters behind. The bells fall silent, the candles burn low, and the hush of stone gives way to the distant hum of another world. Let your thoughts drift, now, not forward, but far, far back, further than monks and manuscripts, further than castles and kings, back to where roads stretched like veins across an empire to a place where sandals beat dust into marble and voices filled the air with markets, laws, and endless echoes of power. Rome, not the Rome of myths or emperors on thrones, but the Rome of daily life, of crowds and corners, of latrines and laundries, of wine poured too warm and bread sold too dry. The Rome you could walk through, smell, touch, endure. You are about to spend a week there, not as a senator, not as a general, but simply as someone trying to live. So breathe deeply now. Feel the weight of the heat, the press of bodies, the rumble of carts over cobblestones, and when you're ready, we'll begin again. A new rhythm, a new life. 1 week in ancient Rome. Imagine yourself waking not to the sound of birdsong or bells, but to the low murmur of hundreds of voices rising through the open atrium of a Roman insula, an apartment block stacked high in dusty tiers, its wooden staircases creaking under the weight of centuries. The sun is barely up, but already the city stirs. Rome, the caput mundi, head of the world. The smell is complex, almost overwhelming. A mixture of baking bread, warm bodies, olive oil, and less pleasant things. Leftovers from yesterday's chamber pots, emptied too hastily into the street below. The stone walls sweat with heat, even before noon. Somewhere, a donkey brays. A child weeps. A vendor calls out in Latin-tinged Greek. You are not a senator, not a philosopher, not a patrician with golden rings or a historian with scrolls. You are simply one of them, a resident of the Roman capital in the 1st century CE, neither wealthy nor quite destitute, somewhere in between, which means, of course, there is little rest and less comfort. In the coming days, you will rise with the sun and fall with exhaustion. You will bathe when you can, eat when you find something to eat, and work because there is no alternative. The empire does not wait for anyone, not even you. So settle in. Let the weight of the tunic fall across your shoulders. Let the dust settle into the soles of your sandals. Let the rhythm of ancient Rome begin to unfold around you, not in battles and conquests, but in bread, bricks, and breath. You're going to try to survive a week, and it begins with a single day. The room is small, not in a charming, cozy way. It's a single bare space, rented at the top of a 5-story insula in the Subura district, one of the more crowded and pungent quarters of Rome. The walls are plastered, though the paint flakes in places. The floor is dusty. There's no kitchen, no toilet, only a straw mattress and a few terracotta vessels. Water jug, oil lamp, small amphora. Above, the roof creaks. Below, the sound of shouting rises. The people on the lower floors, richer tenants, closer to water, to safety if fire breaks out, are already beginning their routines. You, on the top floor, are last in line. Always. The air is warm. The city is always warm. And it is always loud. Outside your door, the alley begins to fill with activity. The smell of fish, salted and stored in clay, drifts up from a shop down the road. Children chase each other barefoot between the legs of an ox being led to market. A woman balances a basket of laundry on her hip as she ducks into the doorway of a nearby Folonica, a Roman laundry. The word soap is not in use yet. Instead, they use aged urine collected in pots to bleach the cloth. A strange scent, ammonia and damp wool, clings to the area. Your first task is to get water. The nearest public fountain is 3 streets away. You carry a jug and join the slow, resigned procession of other residents. It's not a cheerful walk, but it's a shared one. You nod to an old man sharpening a knife. You avoid eye contact with a man slumped in the shadows. You pass shrines tucked into walls, Lares and Penetus, household gods and guardian spirits. Offerings of dried figs, bits of bread, and coins lie scattered at their bases. By mid-morning, you're hungry. If you have a few bronze asses to spare, you can buy a small loaf of panis from a papina, one of the countless little taverns and snack stalls scattered along Rome's back alleys. It's coarse, gritty bread. You've heard stories of bakers mixing sawdust or powdered marble into the dough to stretch the flour. You eat it anyway. It fills your belly. That's enough. There is no lunch hour, no pause, only the heat of midday. And whatever your labor demands of you, perhaps you were a day laborer, hired at the forum for a day's work hauling bricks or plastering a wall, perhaps a messenger, perhaps a helper in a merchant's stall. There is no job security, only the coin in your hand at day's end. And should illness strike, fever, a wound, something in the water, you don't stop. There's nowhere to stop. No clinics, no doctors for people like you. A poultice, a prayer, that is all. As the day stretches on, you might visit the public latrines. Long stone benches with holes cut into them, communal and lacking in privacy. You might wash your hands at a fountain afterward, though no one expects it. And if the sun burns too fiercely, there is always the shade of the baths. For a modest fee, the thermae open to all classes of Roman men. You move from the apoditerium, where you disrobe, to the tepidarium, the warm room, then the caldarium, the hot bath. You soak, you sweat, you scrape the dirt from your skin with a curved bronze strigil. The air smells of steam, oil, and bodies. It is the closest thing to peace you'll find all day. But it does not last. Evening draws close. You return home. Dinner, if you are fortunate, is a bowl of beans, onions, or lentils. If not, it is more bread. There is no meat, save for occasional scraps. No wine, unless watered down and sour. Night in Rome is not quiet. Shutters clatter. The street below is alive with laughter, arguments, footsteps. Torches flicker, a patrol of vigiles. Rome's firemen and watchmen pass by with creaking leather armor and tired eyes. You blow out your lamp. The room falls dark. The mattress prickles with straw. Somewhere nearby, a baby cries. A rat scurries across a beam. Sleep comes, but only briefly, because tomorrow you must do it all again, and again, and again. Such is the rhythm of the common Roman. Not glorious, not grand, but enduring. Nonetheless, now let us climb the marble steps, not those of an apartment tenement, but of a domus, a private home, enclosed behind tall walls, facing inward toward a shaded atrium with a small indoor pool. Here, the air is still. The voices outside are muffled. The scent is different, too. Olive oil and beeswax, mingled with laurel and incense. You are now in the world of a magistratus, a Roman official, perhaps a quaestor or aedile, tasked with maintaining public order, overseeing markets, or managing treasury records. Not the pinnacle of power, but close enough to taste it. Your day begins early. Well before the second hour, you rise, not from a straw mattress in a rented room, but from a carved wooden bed draped in linen. Your sandals placed precisely where your household slave left them the night before. Your first duty is not labor, but appearance. The toga must be draped properly, cumbersome, formal, a physical reminder of your status and your restraint. It is not a garment for comfort, It is a garment for being seen. You eat lightly, bread with honey, maybe a few olives, a boiled egg, if the cook has prepared one. Breakfast is not a social affair. The domus is still quiet, save for the soft movements of slaves tending the garden or lighting the oil lamps in the hallway. Then, the salutatio. This is your public moment. You sit in the atrium on the ancestral couch, and your clients arrive. Dozens of men of lower status, dependents who rely on your patronage for favors, protection, even basic sustenance. They greet you with deference. Some bring petitions. Others simply show their face to remain in your good graces. In return, they may receive a sportula, a small token, sometimes a meal, sometimes a coin. This ritual is not optional. It is a performance of power and reciprocity. Without clients, you are a man with a title and no gravity. From there, you make your way to the forum. The streets are busy, but you are given space, not by law, but by expectation. Your retinue follows, an assistant, a scriba to take notes, and perhaps a lictor bearing the fasces, symbol of your office. The bundle of rods is a reminder. You represent the law, and with it, the right to punish. The forum is many things at once: marketplace, courthouse, Senate floor, theater. You may spend your morning reviewing construction bids for a new aqueduct or inspecting the weights and measures used by grain vendors. You listen to complaints, some petty, some serious. You issue minor judgments. If you are an aedile, perhaps you are organizing a public festival, liaising with entertainers and architects to construct temporary stages. There is endless preparation, endless paper, or rather, parchment, wax tablets, dictated notes. There are no filing cabinets in Rome, only memory and scribes. You take no lunch. Food, if it comes, is a hurried handful of dates or dried figs from your servant's satchel, water from a public fountain, a brief retreat to a nearby bathhouse, if time permits. In the afternoon, you might attend the Senate. You are not at its head, but you are within it. You listen, debate. The air is thick with formality. Men speak slowly, with long preambles, invoking ancestors and laws. The language is lofty. Cicero's ghost still lingers in every well-formed phrase. But beneath it, there is maneuvering, always maneuvering, allies to secure, rivals to undermine. It is not a place of shouting. It is a place of calculated pauses. When business concludes, you return home. The domus is no longer silent. The evening meal is approaching. Cena, you may host a few colleagues or dine alone with your family. Reclining on couches, you are served in courses, eggs, salad, fish, stewed lentils, perhaps roast chicken, and a small honey cake to close. Wine, mixed with water, flows freely, but is sipped with restraint. To drink to excess is to invite ridicule. You are still being watched. The conversation drifts. The flicker of oil lamps paints shadows on the painted walls. Musicians may play softly. A reader might recite a passage from Virgil or a newly written satire. Eventually, the guests leave. The slaves clear the plates. The atrium grows dark again. You return to your chamber. You remove the toga, slowly, carefully. It folds in thick waves on the stool beside your bed. Outside, Rome continues. The cries of the poor, the creak of carts, the murmur of distant voices in Greek, Punic, and Latin. But within the domus, there is stillness. Tomorrow, you will rise again. The city does not rest. The empire does not slow. And your office, for now, is your burden to bear. power in Rome is never quiet. It is ceremonial, exhausting, and always watched. Let us step now, not into the streets, but into the undercurrent of the city. Not the laws, not the politics, but the unseen structure of time, comfort, and daily ritual. The things that hold a civilization together quietly beneath the clamor. You would not know what time it is in Rome. There are no clocks, no chimes to mark the hour. Instead, you learn the subtle movements of the day, the long shadow of the basilica wall at morning, the stillness of the forum at noon, the angle of sunlight through the courtyard as it reaches your household altar. Time is kept not by minutes, but by intervals, divided into 12 hours from sunrise to sunset, regardless of the season, which means in winter, an hour may last less than 45 modern minutes, and in summer, it may stretch beyond 75. The passage of time is soft, implied, measured more by bells in the temples, by the cries of street vendors, and by the rhythm of the baths. Yes, the baths. To visit the Roman baths is to enter a small world within the greater one, not simply to cleanse, but to gather, to speak, to unwind, and to observe. Let yourself step into the thermae. The doorway is grand, carved with columns and statues. Inside, the air shifts, warm, humid, fragrant with oils and bodies. First, the apoditerium, the changing room, a space of stone benches and niches in the wall, where you disrobe and leave your garments under the eye of an attendant. There is always a sense of mild vulnerability here. Nudity is ordinary, but theft is common. You watch your tunic carefully. Then, into the tepidarium, the warm room. Soft heat wraps around you like a damp cloth. Your skin begins to loosen, pores open. The walls gleam with condensation, and voices echo softly in Latin and Greek, bouncing off marble and mosaic. This is where conversation begins, about politics, about food, about gossip in the upper tiers of the Senate, or a new fishmonger at the market. Some men lie back, eyes closed. Others sit, legs folded, breathing in the steam. You move next to the caldarium, the hot bath. Here, the heat presses against your chest. The floor is heated from beneath by the hypocaust, a network of raised tiles and vented air warmed by a fire stoked by slaves who work in tunnels beneath your feet. The water is nearly too hot to bear. You lower yourself slowly. You feel your pulse in your ears. It is not comfortable, but it is deeply Roman. Endurance is a virtue, even in leisure. Then comes the strigil, a curved tool of metal. You smear your skin with perfumed oil and then scrape it clean. Dirt, sweat, dead skin, all sloughed away in soft curls. You emerge, cleaner, perhaps, but also emptied. Your body softened, your mind calmed. Next, the frigidarium, a plunge into cold water, a jolt, the sensation of blood retreating inward. Some skip it, others relish it. A moment to feel sharp again, before returning to the world outside. But bathing is not the only ritual. Across the empire, meals are sacred, not for their grandeur, but for their order. Breakfast is light, lunch lighter, but dinner, cena, is where the household gathers, where guests recline, where wine is poured carefully, always diluted. And then there are the household gods, Lares, Penates, and the genius of the family. Every home has a shrine, no matter how poor. Every morning, a small offering, a crumb of bread, a pinch of salt, a drop of wine, not in fear, but in tradition. Even the poorest citizen, living in a rented room, may nod to the wall where a painted figure of Mercury or Vesta watches over a small bowl of stale olives. Ritual is repetition, and repetition is safety. And yet, despite all these shared practices, much of Roman life remains veiled in mystery. Consider the curse tablets, buried beneath temples or tossed into sacred springs, thin sheets of lead etched in tiny letters, invoking the gods to harm a rival, expose a thief, or punish a cheating lover. They lie silent now, but they once pulsed with the secret desires of everyday Romans. Consider the sundials, strangely inaccurate, timepieces stolen from Greece and adapted for a city where shadows fall differently. Some people mistrusted them, others swore by them, but most simply looked to the sky and moved with the light. Even the calendar, so orderly, with its months and festivals, was once chaos, a tangle of lunar months, political maneuvering, and ad hoc days inserted by priests to manipulate power. Only when Julius Caesar introduced his reform did Rome settle into a rhythm we might almost recognize. And still, there were festivals, so many festivals, days when the normal rules of labor, class, and decorum bent or vanished, when streets filled with musicians, dancers, and masked revelers, when temples overflowed with smoke and laughter, and even slaves were offered wine and a place at the table. These moments, too, are ritual, reversal, as tradition, excess, as relief. Even in an empire of stone, there is joy, quiet, rhythmic, heavily worn, but real. So when you ask what it was like to live, truly live, in ancient Rome, remember this: it was not all senators and soldiers, it was not all blood and law, it was also bathwater, barely warm, bread, hard at the edges, a whisper to a household god, a handful of dates, and the sun moving slowly across the wall of your rented room. Now, let us walk again, not through the streets of the market, nor the quiet corridors of a magistrate's domus, but through two vastly different worlds, separated by distance, status, and fate, yet connected by the same empire. Imagine the soft crush of sand underfoot. The air is still, the sunlight harsh. You are in the ludus, a training school for gladiators. Your tunic sticks to your back. The iron on your wrists has left faint, raw marks. You're not here by choice. Most gladiators were not volunteers. They were prisoners of war, enslaved men, or criminals condemned to public combat. A few, octorati, chose this path in desperation or for fame, but the majority simply woke one day to find themselves property of the lanista, the trainer who now owns your body. Training is constant, discipline absolute. You rise before dawn, drill in formation, spar in pairs, practice footwork, endurance, and the slow art of surviving in spectacle. The wooden sword is heavy, the shield unwieldy. You train until your legs shake, until the dust clings to your teeth. The food is good, better than many free citizens might eat. Barley porridge, lentils, dried fruits. You are fed well, not out of kindness, but because you are an investment. And in the evening, there is silence. No women, no wine, no freedom of movement, just the shared quiet of men who know what awaits. Some will fight only once. Some will rise to fame, retiarius, with trident and a net, secutor, with heavy armor and rounded helmet. Some will fall in the first bout, remembered only as a name etched into a wall. The arena is not just a place of death. It is a theater of control. And as you stand there, surrounded by tens of thousands of Roman voices, chanting, laughing, judging. You know that even your last breath may not be yours to choose. Above you, in the stone seats shaded by a great canopy, sits the emperor. His world is marble and silk. Yours is dust and sweat. And yet, in this moment, your fates touch. For across the city, the contrast is staggering. Let us leave the sand behind. Now the floor cools beneath your feet. You are within a villa, a country estate, owned by a senator or wealthy equestrian. The walls are painted with soft frescoes, mountains, gods, and pastoral scenes. There are fountains shaped like dolphins. Peacocks stroll across the tiled courtyard. The ceiling is open to the sky. The breeze smells of lavender and pine. Slaves tend to every need. They trim the gardens. They press the olives. They read poetry aloud while you recline beneath a fig tree. They are everywhere and nowhere, silent when not spoken to, always watching, always carrying. You dine beneath a pergola. 6 courses, spiced dormice, honey-roasted boar, fresh oysters from the coast, wine aged in amphorae, glassware imported from the east. And yet, even here, all is not safety. The elite must navigate a different battlefield, political, social, symbolic. One wrong alliance, one failed speech, and exile, or worse, could come overnight. You are a senator, yes, but you are not Caesar. And Caesar watches everyone. So you build elaborate tombs to your ancestors. You fund temples. You host games. You carve your name into the city with donations of marble and grain. This is your defense, legacy. And still, you may fall. For in Rome, everything is uncertain, except hierarchy. There are those who command and those who obey. There are those who feast and those who serve. Even within families, power shifts. A wealthy woman, perhaps the matron of a noble house, may wield great influence behind closed doors. Yet in public, she is silent. Her opinions must pass through her husband or son. A boy born to wealth may receive the best tutors, the finest Greek instruction, a future in the Senate. And still, his life may be cut short by illness, war, or the whispers of rivals. And for the enslaved, there is no future, only now, only orders, only hope for manumission, freedom granted after years of faithful service. But for most, the week repeats, the cycle continues, and so you see, to survive in ancient Rome was not only to eat or sleep, to avoid war or disease. It was to navigate a world of invisible lines, lines of class, of speech, of gesture, lines between sand and silk, between the lash and the laurel. Cross the wrong line, and you fall, and no one, not even the emperor, is truly safe from the slow crumble of time and fate. Soft breath in, soft breath out. You've walked the streets of ancient Rome now, felt the worn cobblestones beneath your feet, listened to the distant hum of the crowd from the baths, watched shadows stretch across marble floors as the day drew to its end. The city, though vast and powerful, never quite slept. Even in darkness, there were footsteps, whispers, lamps flickering in doorways. Rome endured by routine, by the rhythm of market stalls, temple bells, and the distant orders. But far away from that marble empire, beyond its maps and roads, past the boundaries of its provinces, lies another world, a colder one, harsher, older in its silence, a land not of columns and arches, but of fjords, longhouses, and unyielding ice, a land where winter comes early, and fire is not a luxury, but survival. Tonight, you'll not walk under torchlit porticos. Tonight, we go further north, where the air stings the skin, where stories are carved into runestones, where strength is measured not in wealth, but in endurance. You're entering the world of the Norse. So, pull your cloak a little tighter, feel the sea wind in your hair, and follow the sound of the waves to a place where every night could be your last. Close your eyes and let the flicker of history begin. Tonight, we leave behind the roads of Rome, the gardens of emperors, the marble and the mosaics. Instead, we travel north, far north, beyond the forests of Germania, beyond the reach of Roman legions or Byzantine scrolls, to a colder, harsher land. Here, the winters are long. The sky hangs low and heavy with cloud. The trees creak beneath frost and snow, and the wind hums a quiet, mournful tune. This is not a world of stone cities or grand libraries. This is the land of fjords, forests, and fire, of gods who shape fate with whispers, not thunder, of people who live not in luxury, but in endurance. Tonight, we step into Viking Scandinavia around the 9th century, not as a warrior, not as a chieftain, but simply as an ordinary traveler, arriving in a small coastal village, just as the sun sinks below the pine-covered hills. The longhouse awaits. Smoke rises in slow spirals from the thatched roof. The sound of distant voices, deep, measured, unfamiliar, carries on the wind. You will not be asked to fight, not tonight, but you will feel the cold, the hunger, the closeness of people who live every day aware that tomorrow may not come. So now, breathe in the scent of salt and ash. Feel the thick, fur-lined cloak draped around your shoulders, and take your first steps into a world lit only by embers, where survival is not a guarantee, but a triumph earned night by night. The snow crunches softly beneath your boots. The sun has slipped below the horizon, but the light has not yet faded entirely. It lingers in that northern twilight, longer than you expect, colder than you're used to. You approach a cluster of timber buildings. They seem almost to rise from the earth itself. Walls made of logs and turf, roofs sagging under layers of snow. Chickens huddle near doorways. A black dog watches you with pale eyes, unmoving. There is no stone here, no candles, no glass, only flame and breath. A man waves you toward the largest structure, long and low, with smoke escaping through a hole in the thatch. This is the langhus, the longhouse, the heart of village life. As you duck through the low doorway, warmth envelops you. Not heat, exactly, but a welcome absence of wind. The air is thick with the mingling scents of burning wood, animal fat, and damp wool. Inside, it is dim. A few oil lamps hang from beams, casting flickering light on wooden walls. The hearth runs down the center of the longhouse, a shallow trench filled with glowing embers. The flames illuminate the faces of those seated around it. Men, women, children, dogs, all huddled close, shoulders touching. There are no private rooms, no beds as you know them. The family sleeps together on raised wooden platforms lined with straw and furs along both sides of the hall. You are shown a space near the end, beside a pile of firewood and a bundle of dried fish. Your host nods once, then returns to carving a length of antler with quiet focus. There is little small talk here. Words are weighed carefully. The language, Old Norse, is rich and complex, but used sparingly. Silence is part of the fabric of the night. You remove your boots. They are stiff with frozen mud. You unwrap the wool scarf from your neck, stiff with ice. Every motion is deliberate. every object treasured. Children whisper under their breath. An old woman stirs a pot of thick stew, barley, root vegetables, maybe a scrap of salted lamb. It is not a feast, but it is warm, and in this world, warmth is everything. As you sit by the hearth, you begin to notice the sounds, the gentle snapping of burning birch, the wind pressing against the wooden walls, the occasional cough, or the sleepy shift of someone adjusting their furs. No one shouts. There is no music tonight, only the rhythm of survival. Outside, the world is darkness. Wolves sometimes come near the village, though they rarely enter. Storms can descend without warning. But inside, among these people, there is something almost sacred, a kind of quiet strength. Tomorrow, they will wake early to feed the livestock, mend nets, split wood. But tonight, they endure the cold, as they have always done, together. You're offered a bowl. You eat slowly. The broth is thin, but comforting. The spoon is carved from horn. The bowl, from wood. Across from you, a boy curls beside his mother, wrapped in fur. He yawns once, then again, and is asleep before his head rests fully on the straw. The flames dance gently. Shadows sway against the beams above. And as the wind rises outside and the longhouse settles into a slow, communal hush, you understand something vital about this place. That survival is not loud. It is not bold. It is shared, steady, slow, and earned, night by night, by those who endure the dark, together. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of the known world, not in the way you might imagine it today, with satellite views or maps drawn in confident ink, but truly at the edge, where beyond the horizon there is only mist, myth, and water. The sea stretches endlessly before you, cold, dark, patient, and behind you, a world of fjords, forests, and family, strong in its own right, but bounded. This is the place where Leif Erikson stood, not as a conqueror, not yet as an explorer, but first, simply as a son, born around the year 970. In the shadow of his father's exile, Leif grew up in Greenland, a land of ice and stone where crops were stubborn and the sea was both friend and devourer. His father, Eric the Red, had been banished from Norway, then Iceland, and had finally claimed this new and unforgiving territory. Leif, as a boy, knew few luxuries. His world was one of oars and sails, of salted fish, thick wool cloaks, and the rhythmic hammering of iron on stone. The winters were long. Time passed, not in hours, but in seasons. But he listened to stories, to winds, to the quiet, unspoken pull of the unknown. By the time he was grown, Leif had become what many Norsemen became, strong, silent, measured, but something in him stirred restlessly, as if the edges of the map whispered directly to him. In his early 20s, Leif set sail for Norway, where he entered the court of King Olaf Tryggvason. There, far from the pine-dark shores of Greenland, Leif found something he hadn't expected: Christianity. He was baptized and returned to Greenland, not only with treasure and tales, but with a new faith. A quiet one at first, woven into the old ways like thread through wool. But it was what came next that would echo through the centuries. There were rumors, as there always were, of a land beyond the sea. A sailor, Bjarni Herjolfsson, had claimed to have seen it. Forests, hills, no snow, but he had not gone ashore. Leif listened, considered, waited, and then he sailed. The voyage was long. There were no charts, only the memory of sky and current, the position of stars, and the steady belief that something waited. And then, there it was. Not ice, not rock, but green, forests, grapes, wild wheat, gentle hills. Vinland, he called it, the land of wine. They stayed for a time, built shelters, explored, but they did not stay forever. The land was beautiful, but not without danger. Encounters with native peoples, recorded only in fragments, and always through the Norse lens, were tense, sometimes violent. So Leif returned to Greenland. He never returned to Vinland, though others tried after him. In time, his story faded, not lost, but folded into saga, told beside fires in the longhouse, half in truth, half in wonder. Leif died quietly, it said. No great final battle, no heroic fall, just time. And so the man who may have been the first European to set foot on North America slipped into history, not with a thunderclap, but with the stillness of a boat drifting gently into fog. Now, as you sit in the longhouse, warmed by the fire and surrounded by the hush of sleep, you might imagine someone telling this very story to their children, in a low voice, softly, like wind through pine, not to boast, but to remember that once someone left behind everything they knew to see what lay beyond the edge. Imagine walking through a quiet field somewhere in southern Sweden. The grass moves gently in the wind. The sky is overcast, as it often is here. In the distance, there are trees, birch, pine, ash, and scattered stones poking out from the earth worn by time. As you approach, you realize these stones are not natural. They are standing, upright, deliberately placed, and some are marked. On one, you see it, winding, serpent-like patterns etched deep into the rock, framing a set of vertical and diagonal lines. At first they seem like scratches, but then the rhythm becomes clear. This is a rune stone, not a tombstone exactly, not merely a monument, but something in between, a message, a memory, a marker left by someone, perhaps a family, who wanted to ensure that the name of the dead would not vanish into the wind. The runes tell stories, not long ones, often just a sentence. Thorstein raised this stone in memory of his brother, Kettle, a brave man. Or Gunvor carved this after her son died on a voyage east. The runes themselves are not just letters. They are symbols of sound and magic. The Norse believed that writing had power, not merely to record, but to shape. The very word runar carries meanings of secret and whisper. They carved into more than stone. Bones, too. Wood, when it could be preserved. The messages were rarely loud, never boastful. Instead, they were acts of quiet remembrance, a way to speak across generations in a place where winters were long and memories fragile. You might notice the Yggdrasil too, carved or painted, a vast tree of life, its roots in the underworld, its branches in the heavens. This wasn't just a myth, it was a worldview. The Norse didn't divide reality as sharply as we do. The seen and the unseen blurred at the edges. Spirits moved in the wind. Fate was woven by unseen hands. And death was not an end, but a change of path. In their burial customs, we glimpse this belief. Archaeologists have found ships buried in the earth, often beneath great mounds. Not seafaring vessels for the living, but ships for the dead, carefully placed, stocked with goods, weapons, tools, even animals. The dead were not sent off with nothing. They were provided for, as if embarking on a long voyage. And perhaps they were. There were many destinations for the dead in Norse thought. Valhalla is well known. where warriors feast and fight endlessly. But there were other places too. Helheim, cold and quiet, for those who died not in battle. Folkvanger, ruled by the goddess Freya, and others, spoken of only in fragments. In these burial ships, we see not only belief, but care, not extravagance, but reverence. Even the quietest soul might be laid to rest with a carved comb, a worn drinking horn, a set of keys, not trophies, not wealth, but tools to continue. You might also find Seder, the quiet Norse magic woven into these spaces. It wasn't cast with wands or shouted spells. It was sung, whispered, often practiced by women known as volur, wandering seeresses wrapped in cloaks, carrying staffs, interpreting fate. They did not seek to change the future, but to understand it, to prepare. And in their understanding lay one simple truth, that life was a thread in a much larger weave. The Norns, the mythic weavers of destiny, sat beneath Yggdrasil, tending to the fates of all beings, gods and mortals alike. They did not shout, they did not bargain, they simply wove. And in this weaving, every snowstorm, every voyage, every quiet death in a winter field had a meaning. So when you walk among these rune stones, or sit in a longhouse listening to a story that seems older than speech, you begin to feel it. That history isn't always told loudly. Sometimes it rests in stone, in silence, in the spaces between what is said and what is left unsaid. Imagine yourself at the edge of a great wooden hall. It is dusk. The air is sharp and carries the distant scent of pine smoke and roasting meat. You hear the sound of voices, measured, not boisterous, speaking in the low tones of political calculation. This is the hall of a jarl, a chieftain or noble. He is not a king, not quite, but his reach is wide, and his word carries the weight of seasons. You step inside. The warmth is immediate. Thick woolen tapestries line the walls, dyed in deep ochres and soft blues. Iron candle holders throw a flickering golden light across the beams overhead. And at the far end of the hall, raised slightly above the others, sits the Jarl. His seat is not a throne, just a sturdy chair, elevated on a wooden dais. His clothing is not gaudy, no bright jewelry, no silk, but it is finer than most. His cloak is thick and fastened with a brooch of bronze inlaid with polished amber. His presence is subtle, but felt. Around him, seated along the walls of the longhouse, are his retainers, his household men, Huskarlar, warriors and advisors, all sworn to serve him. And behind the scenes, often unnoticed by outside eyes, move the women of the household, managing the flow of goods, maintaining alliances, and observing, always observing. For the Jarl's wife, often called a fru or lady, is no idle figure. She carries the keys to the storerooms. She oversees trade and hospitality, and in some cases, she may be a seeress, versed in fate and dream, whose voice holds weight beyond the domestic. The difference between her world and that of the peasant woman who milks cows in the snow is vast, yet still tethered by the same winds, the same earth. A jarl's wealth was measured not only in coin, though silver dirhams from far-off lands glittered in their hoards, but also in people, in loyalty, in reputation, in the gift cycle that bound followers to leaders not through brute command, but through reciprocity. The Jarl gave gifts, swords, rings, food, protection. In return, he received service, honor, and the stories that would be told of him long after his death. These were not always peaceful men. Some earned their silver through raiding, through expeditions that brought back not only goods, but slaves. The thralls, as they were called, lived lives of quiet labor, with little hope of freedom. Some, if fortunate, might be freed in time, most would not. And yet within this structure, all was held in delicate balance. An insult to a jarl could spark a blood feud. An ill-managed household could erode a family's power in a single season. A failed alliance at a wedding feast might ripple through the fjords for years. Even religion at this level was political. A public sacrifice to Thor was as much a statement of power as it was of piety. To host a blot, a feast to honor the gods, was a show of wealth, coordination, and leadership. The gods, after all, watched closely, and so did the people. Some jarls sought to elevate themselves further. A few crowned themselves kings, small kings of small territories. Others looked outward, seeking trade with Christian rulers, or marrying into powerful foreign families. By the late 900s, some began to convert to Christianity, not always from faith, but from strategy. The cross, in time, replaced the hammer, but not overnight, and not without tension. Many jarls lived at the cusp of two worlds, the old and the new, the mythic and the pragmatic, the longhouse and the court. Some made the leap, others did not. Still others were simply forgotten, their halls reclaimed by moss and silence. And what of the people beneath them? The farmers who worked the land, the blacksmiths who forged their blades, the mothers who raised their sons with lullabies and warnings. They lived in the shadow of power, but not always in fear of it. The relationship was complex, sometimes oppressive, sometimes mutual, always human. In truth, the world of the Viking elite was never fully removed from that of the commoner. They shared the same sun, the same seasons, the same end. For in the end, even the jarl would lie beneath the earth, his name carved in stone, his treasures scattered, his voice gone silent, save for the whispers that remained in story and soil. Now, if you are still awake, still drifting gently through the folds of time, then I invite you to stay with me for just a little longer as we gently conclude our journey and return from the world of fjords and firelight to your own quiet corner of the present. You have walked the frost-hardened paths of a Norse farmer, rising in darkness, shaping a life from earth and effort. You have sat beside a novice monk, cloaked in wool and silence, yearning to belong. You have knelt at the side of an ancient runestone, tracing the lines left by a hand long gone, and you have stood in the long shadows of power, watching as jarls carved their names into the winds of their time. And now, as the night deepens and the outside world softens into hush, you find yourself once more in your own place, your own time, still and quiet. The rhythm of their lives was different, and yet not entirely unfamiliar. Their days were full of work, of hope, of cold. Their nights were dark, long, and filled with story. They feared hunger. They treasured warmth. They carried the weight of belief, of duty, of uncertainty. So much has changed, and yet, the beating heart of it all, the yearning for meaning, for comfort, for something to hold on to, that remains. Tonight, you're not in a smoky longhouse. You're not bracing against the wind in a sheepskin cloak. You are here, safe, sheltered, surrounded by quiet. Let the past rest now. Let the voices fade, one by one, like candles gently snuffed. The jarl's hall is empty. The blacksmith's fire has gone cold. The runes on the stone remain, but their reader has long since drifted into dreams. And so may you. Sleep now, and may the stillness of the old world guide you gently into your own. Good night, and thank you for traveling so far.